my introductions.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. For those in-house, we would ask that courtesy check as we prepare to begin that our cell phones and other mobile devices are silenced or turned off. And, of course, we will post the program on the Heritage homepage following our presentation for everyone's future reference. Leading our program today is John Malcolm, who is the Ed Gilbertson and Sherry Lindbergh Gilbertson Senior Legal Fellow. He also serves as director of our Edwin Meese III Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Prior to joining us here at Heritage, he held a variety of positions, including serving as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. He has also been Executive Vice President in charge of anti-piracy operations at the Motion Picture Association of America. And he has also been the General Counsel at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Please join me in welcoming John Malcolm. John?
Thank you, John. Well, we're here today with Josh Blackman to discuss his latest book, Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. It is the second in what will likely be a trilogy on the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. And what a difference a week makes. My guess is that in light of the election, the direction of the third book may turn out to be a bit different than one might have expected. The history of Obamacare and the lawsuits that it spawned is certainly worthy of a trilogy. Obamacare has given us many memorable quotes. Who can forget Nancy Pelosi, who when asked by a reporter what part of the Constitution authorizes Congress to order Americans to buy health insurance, and she replied, "Are you serious?" Or Jonathan Gruber, the MIT professor, who's been labeled the architect of Obamacare, who said, if you had a law which said that healthy people are going to pay in, you made explicit healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever, but basically that was really, really critical to get the thing to pass. And of course, President Obama, who said repeatedly, if you like your health care plan, you will be able to keep your health care plan. And who also said that if Congress wouldn't do what he wanted, that would not stop him for providing the American people the kind of help that they need, because I've got a pen and I've got a phone. Or Chief Justice Roberts, who acknowledged in NFIB versus Sebelius that the Obamacare Act describes a so-called shared responsibility payment as a penalty, not a tax, but stated that the shared responsibility payment may, for constitutional purposes, be considered a tax, not a penalty. And finally, although believe me, I could go on, the Chief Justice in King versus Burwell, otherwise known as Obamacare Part 2, who stated that the most natural reading of the phrase an exchange established by the state would be one that excluded federal exchanges, but that such a reading would undermine the purpose of the act, and therefore the court could view a seemingly unambiguous phrase as ambiguous and interpret it to include federal exchanges. Here today to discuss all of this is Josh Blackman, who's an associate professor at South Texas College of Law in Houston. After graduating from the Antonin Scalia Law School, Josh clerked for Judge Kim Gibson of the District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania, and then Judge Danny Boggs on the Sixth Circuit. In addition to being a prolific author and commentator, Josh is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute and the founder and president of the Harlan Institute, which is designed to teach young people about the Constitution and the Supreme Court in a highly entertaining way. Please join me in welcoming Josh Blackman.
Thank you. It's a special treat to be here at Heritage because indeed Obamacare was a lot to Heritage. Some of its core ideas came from Heritage, and indeed the challenge to stop Obamacare came from Heritage. That's a very fitting place. And indeed, this talk in this week is very different than my Obamacare talk last week. So to allude to John's opening, my first book was called Unprecedented, The Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. The second book is called Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. And the third book we called Undone, which is how I think I see the future of the ACA going forward. So I'd like to walk you through the entire history of the Affordable Care Act in less than an hour. I promise I can do it. In fact, its history will be soon finite. So to talk about talk about Obamacare, we actually have to begin with Hillary Care. Whenever I give this to law students, none of them are old enough to remember this, but in the early 1990s, President Clinton assigned his wife, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, with the task of reforming health insurance. She came up with a plan known as Hillary Care, which would effectively have been a national health care system. The problem with this plan was people didn't quite know what to make of it until a series of commercials were aired on TV. And remember these commercials? John, remember these commercials? He does. These were the Harry and Louise commercials. They aired all over TV in the 1990s. And you had a ma and pa sitting around a table reading this voluminous book about this new healthcare law. And they're saying, I like my doctor. I like my health insurance. I want to keep my doctor, right? I don't want the government getting between me and my doctor. Within a year of these commercials airing, the popularity of Hillary Care plummeted. This was not a mistake. By and large, before Obamacare, people who had insurance liked it. Year after year, 80 to 85% of Americans said, we like our insurance. So a lesson was learned from this experiment. If you want to reform health insurance, people have to be able to keep the plans they like, or at least be told that they can keep the plans they like. Because there's a basic principle of economics in health insurance. You can't avoid this. Adam Smith 101. There are three attributes, right? Is it affordable? Is it accessible? And is it comprehensive? I'll give you two. You can't have three, right? If you want to make it cheap, it's not going to be very good. If you want to make it available to everyone, it's not going to be cheap. Pick two. You can't have three. But Obamacare was sold to the American people as a bill of goods. It was a fraud. It really was. Jonathan Gruber was exactly right. We were told that health insurance would be available to everyone, be completely comprehensive, and, as its name suggests, be affordable. How was this lie told? With a simple promise, repeated nearly 36 times. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Now, this wasn't only a lie. This was pernicious, and I say pernicious not lightly. This gave the American people a sense of entitlement that we can simultaneously give insurance to 30 million new people and in no way screw up what you already have. This, my friends, is utterly impossible. The way Obamacare works, as John Gruber said, is by taking money from healthy people, giving them worse care, and giving it to sick people who use a disproportionate share of their insurance markets. This is how Obamacare was sold, but the lie paved over it. We were told you can keep the policy you like. This was never possible. No matter, because back in 2009 and 2010, Majority Leader Reid had 60 votes in Congress. And he made the decision that it's not necessary to have a single Republican vote to pass Obamacare. It will be a straight party line vote. This was a colossal failure of judgment and arrogance and hubris, which was pretty typical for Harry Reid. But even for Reid, this was a pretty big blunder. You see, the ACA that was voted on by the Senate in December of 2009, all 3,000 pages of it, right? No one actually read the bill. We don't read bills anymore. Matt Baucus, who was the chairman of the Finance Committee, bragged, I pay people to read bills for me. Okay, so any of you are interns, whatever, one day you'll read a bill for a member of Congress. That'll be your future job. So in December of 2009, the Senate voted on this 3,000-page bill that no one read. Now, this was not meant to be the final version of the bill. This was basically a draft. The idea was, let's pass a version of the bill in the Senate, and the House will pass a version of the bill, and we'll conference back and forth, and you'll resolve any differences, and then we'll have this amazing healthcare law. None of that ever happened. Why? Senator Ted Kennedy died in the summer of 2009. He was replaced by a Republican in Massachusetts by the name of Scott Brown. And Scott Brown ran as a Tea Party candidate to be the 41st vote to stop Obamacare. Once he was elected, the Democrats lost their filibuster-proof majority. So what to do next, right? What would the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, figure out? Budget reconciliation, right? What is this? If you make changes to a bill that affect budgets, it bypasses a filibuster process. Usually this is done when you have a complicated budget and you have a few changes here and a few changes there. No. They basically amended the entire 3,000-page ACA through this reconciliation process for the sole purpose of passing this without a filibuster. Indeed, John Boehner and his caucus were utterly helpless in stopping it. And the Affordable Care Act passed the House, this reconciliation bill, by a vote of 219 to 210. Critically on this chart, 0 Republican votes. Not a single Republican supported Obamacare. To this day, the repeal and replace mantra, Jim DeMint on down, right, stems from this sort of vote, where the idea was let's reform 15% of the U.S. economy with a straight party line vote. This was the height of the arrogance in the first Obama term. I should note, though, that the fact that the Democrats used reconciliation to pass Obamacare in 2010 means that Republicans, wait for it, can use reconciliation to repeal parts of Obamacare in 2017. They can't repeal the entire damn thing, but they can repeal lots of it and make it not particularly functional. So the decision to go this straight party line vote in 2010, they did not anticipate what would happen in 2017. I see a few people laughing, but this is a legitimate live issue which you'll be hearing a lot about in the future. No matter. The bill goes to President Obama's desk. You can see he's there smiling. And he's saying, wow, people who remember Obamacare is awesome. This is my legacy. This is going to be like the greatest thing ever. It's going to be like FDR and Johnson combined, right? Not quite. Within 7 minutes, that's all it took, of the Affordable Care Act being signed into law, constitutional challenges were filed across the country. Attorneys general from Virginia, from Florida, challenged the legality of Obamacare's mandate. And this was a subject to my first book, Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. And the question was, can the government make you buy broccoli? Right? Can they make you buy insurance? The ACA said, if you're uninsured, we're going to fine you. There was a mandate to buy insurance. Can Congress regulate economic inactivity, that merely sitting around doing nothing? Can Congress then regulate my decision not to buy insurance? It went to the Supreme Court, and as John Roberts does every June, he breaks my heart without fail. He breaks my heart every June. This was one of the first times he did it. The Chief Justice, in a decision that still boggles my mind and Ilya Shapiro's mind whenever we see it, said, well, Congress can't make you buy insurance. And Obamacare is not a tax. But we will pretend it's a tax to save it, right? So there's no mandate to buy insurance. That's silly, right? Instead, what do we have? A tax on going uninsured. And you may ask yourself, what's the difference between a mandate to buy insurance or a tax for going uninsured? I don't know. Ask Robert. He's across the street. Maybe he knows. But by slicing and dicing the Constitution, he was able to uphold Obamacare, and he felt good about himself. He's the next John Marshall. He made Linda Greenhouse happy for 5 minutes, and then, we went back to normal. But with this, the ACA was upheld in 2012. And it bounced back to the political process. And it fell to this man to stop Obamacare, Mitt Romney, right? Who's promised repeal and replace Obamacare. Romney quite possibly was the worst human being on earth to run against Obamacare. Maybe no one else worse. Why? Because as the governor of Massachusetts, he worked hand in hand with Jonathan Gruber and Ted Kennedy in imposing Romney Care, which looks a lot like Obamacare with a mandate and subsidies and all these other tools. During the debate with President Obama, the president said Romney was the godfather of Obamacare, and that wasn't too far from the truth. So on the most important issue of 2012, not even 4 months after the Supreme Court, we have the re-election of President Obama. I would love to know what he's saying to the chief here. Thanks a lot, buddy, right? Fun fact, though, you may not know this. Obama and FDR share a record of taking the oath of office 4 times. Okay, thankfully, Obama's only had 2 terms. He can't have 2 more. I don't think he'd withstand that. These gray hairs are starting to come in. How? So the first time they did the oath of office, he and the Chief Justice flubbed the oath. Remember this, right? So they did a do-over at the White House. Fast forward to 2013. The Constitution says you're sworn in January 20th. January 20th was a Sunday. So they did a private swearing in the White House, and then the big one across the street the following day. So President Obama has taken the oath of office 4 times. Thankfully, only 2 terms to show for it. So this is how Obamacare made its way till 2013, the subject of my first book. My next book begins now with what I like to call Conscience and Contraception, which sounds like an awful Jane Austen novel. The Affordable Care Act, the Affordable Care Act from its beginning, from its birth, no pun intended, was mired in an abortion debate. You may recall that one of the biggest controversies was over would Obamacare fund abortions, and you had these pro-life Democrats like Bart Stupak and others who were very worried that this would expand funding for abortions. So how did President Obama resolve that conflict? With his pen and phone. He signed an executive order, which basically said nothing. It said, I won't change any prohibitions on abortion funding, which means absolutely nothing. The executive order predated the statute, and executive orders can be repealed in 5 seconds, as we will find out in about 60 days. No less, the pro-life Democrats were they were persuaded to change their votes, and they were able to give adequate support to get over the 219 hump in the House, and with that, Obamacare passed. Though while all eyes were focused on whether Obamacare would fund abortions, the true religious liberty conflict was in the background, which no one focused on. Senator Mikulski of Maryland introduced a provision of the ACA known as the Women's Health Amendment. The Women's Health Amendment. Now I'm going to blow your minds, right? You've all heard of Hobby Lobby. You've heard of the Little Sisters of the Poor, right? And you've heard of the contraception mandate, right? The Affordable Care Act does not have a contraception mandate. What? The actual statute that Congress voted on, right? They voted on the actual statute, they still do, has no contraception mandate. That mandate is a creation of the Obama administration. Why? This is a provision. It's a little hard to see, so I'll read it for you. It says group insurance plans must offer, quote, with respect to women, such additional preventive care and screenings. Insurers must provide, quote, preventive care for women. What is preventive care? Tom Miller's going like this, right? The statute does not define preventive care. It says we will let HHS decide what preventive care is. The members of Congress punted on this. They knew, okay, let's put this word preventive care in there, Chevron doctrine. The agency will say, oh man, that we can run with that, right? So what happened? HHS and this group called the Health Research Service Administration and the Institute of Medicine got together and held this, this great meeting. They said, okay, we decide that preventive care means the full range of FDA-approved contraceptions, everything from the morning after pill to the IUDs to Plan B, whatever else you want, the condoms, whatever, right? The full range of FDA-approved contraceptives. So as a consequence of interpreting preventive care to include all birth control methods, now employers were required to provide birth control to their female employees. Most already did, but now they were actually mandated to do so. This is an actual advertisement put out by a government agency in Colorado, encouraging young millennial women to sign up for health care so that they can get birth. I'll read it for you if you can't see it. It says, got insurance? Let's get physical. OMG, that's, oh my God, John. OMG, he's hot. Let's hope he's as easy to get as this birth control. And you see, he has his hands in his pocket, she's smiling, giving thumbs up. You know, it doesn't leave much to the imagination. But you see, the problem, well, not the problem, but one of the costs of giving female employees health insurance is who pays for it? The nuns. You see, as originally drafted, the Obamacare contraceptive mandate required the Little Sisters of the Poor, an order of celibate nuns, to pay for the morning after pill for their employees. This was the absolute blindness to religion within the White House. The original mandate, I am not joking you, said you get exempted from this if and only if you are a house of worship that primarily serves people of your own religion. So what if you were a church that operated a soup kitchen or a hypothermia shelter, and you don't check baptismal certificates at the door? That is, anyone who comes to your food shelter gets a meal, right? You were not religious enough for the Obama administration to be exempted from this mandate. That is stunning. That blows my mind. And only after even like Chris Matthews said, well, I think that's a little bit too far, they scaled it back and they issued another round of regulations. Okay, well, all houses of worship are exempt, but not the Little Sisters of the Poor, not religious charities. Okay, that too was, oh my God, you're making nuns pay for the morning after pill. That's a bad idea. Okay, another round of regulations. Okay, we won't make the nuns pay for the birth control, but we will make them sign this form. Here, I'll show you a picture of it. This form. And by signing this form, you authorize us to amend your insurance contract to make sure that birth control is provided. And the nun said, no, we don't want to be complicit in this sin. Go away. Go give these women yourself. We don't want to be part of this. And with that, the Obama administration said, nope, that's as far as we'll go. Unless you sign this form, we are going to fine you thousands of dollars a day. These nuns can't afford it. They're a religious charity. And this gave rise to the first major religious liberty battle within the Affordable Care Act. But the first one to actually make it to the court was Hobby Lobby, a for-profit corporation. Let's pause for a minute and let's talk about politics, because the ACA and politics are very closely intertwined. After the 2012 election and Mitt Romney's defeat, I was pretty sure that Obamacare battles were more or less over, that this would be, mostly a done deal. I was wrong. You see, my junior senator and a federal study member of good standing, Ted Cruz, stormed the country with a heritage, a support tour, Heritage Action for America. And Cruz's plan was, let's defund Obamacare, right? Defund Obamacare before it starts. Cruz and Lee were on this nationwide tour trying to barnstorm. So here was the strategy, right? Let me walk you through this. The appropriation for the government funding ended on September 30th, okay? Obamacare opened for business on October 1st. So here's the genius, right? Funding ends September 30th, and then Obamacare opens October 1st. So Cruz's plan was, if we can defund Obamacare on September 30th, then the next morning Obamacare cannot open for business, and it will be awesome. Okay, it didn't exactly go to plan. That's not exactly what happened. But Cruz's last stand and his most famous stand was his 24-hour filibuster against Obamacare. And putting aside the merits, as a feat of strength, that's remarkable. I'm up here for an hour and I'm tired. I can't imagine talking for like a day. No bathroom breaks, nothing. If he even sits down, he loses his seat, right? Another thing that people don't realize, Ted Cruz didn't actually filibuster. It technically wasn't a filibuster. Why? A vote was scheduled the next day at noon. Nothing Cruz could have done would have postponed that vote. So in no way did Ted's filibuster shut down the government. This is a common misconception, right? It didn't. There was a vote going to happen. The vote happened. Nothing delayed it. But we did see Ted Cruz read Green Eggs and Ham to his kids from a Dr. Seuss book. And this is Ted the first night. And the second night, you see his ties coming down a little bit, looking a little haggard. And I know you can't see it, but there are any Texans room. He's actually wearing a come and take it pin. It's the battle flag of Gonzales, which was a very fitting image. And Cruz emerged, starting his campaign for presidency. I'm sorry, starting well, I'm in the wrong place for that one. But Cruz emerged victorious, saying we need to stop Obamacare. The House carried his mantle. And with that, no budget was reached. And it led to the shutdown of the government. Now, it wasn't actually a government shutdown. Let's be very precise about this. The mail keeps coming. Your Social Security checks keep coming. Medicare keeps coming. What goes away? The most visible things? Parks, right? If I ever had my way, and maybe tell Mr. Trump about this, in the event of a shutdown, fund the parks. Because that's the only thing people actually care about. I mean, no one really cares about federal employees. I mean, they get their pay and back pay. I mean, no one actually cares about them during the short term, except for restaurants in D.C., perhaps. But the parks are the big deal. And the biggest manifestation of the shutdown were the World War II memorial not too far from the White House. Now, they have these things called honor flights. This is amazing. They bring these World War II vets, these guys in their 80s and 90s, to D.C. for the day. They go see the memorial. It's a very touching experience. I actually tried signing my grandpa up for this, but he passed away before he was actually approved for it. So, but it's a really good program. So, what do you think these vets did when they saw these barricades at the memorial? Well, I'll tell you what, the shores of Normandy couldn't stop them. These barriers were not going to stop these vets. Go get them, right? So they literally took these stupid gates, walked across the street, and dropped them on the White House lawn. I thought that was a very fitting image. But there's a serious political element to these shutdowns. For example, the Grand Canyon, which is a hole in the ground, was closed. I don't know how you close the Grand Canyon. Mount Rushmore, which is a mountain, was closed. I don't know how you close a mountain. There was even a little highway overpass where you can look at it. They shut down this road so people couldn't even drive past it. This was pure politics. Curiously, Governor Cuomo managed to open up Ellis Island, that they were able to fund that one through state funds. So there's definitely a political element to this. But all good things must come to an end. The government was shut down. I was happy, at least for a bit. But the shutdown came to a crashing halt with the debt ceiling. Now, what's a debt ceiling? This is the amount of money the government appropriates to be spent in any given year. And once you hit this limit, you have to start defaulting on debts. Republicans caved, as they usually do, entirely. Not only did they fully fund Obamacare, they fully fund the increase of the debt ceiling, and they got rid of the sequestration. The sequester was a way of cutting back funding. They lost that too. So the shutdown, yielded nothing, and actually took a few steps back for the cause of limited government. But perhaps even worse, the government shutdown in October of 2013 shielded the unraveling, where my book comes from, the unraveling of Obamacare. So on the same day, October 1st, a magical day, cosmic coincidence, on the same day that the government went down, healthcare.gov opened for business. Or at least it was supposed to. You see, the government spent $2 billion, billion with a B, $2 billion on a website that did not work. It was an absolute nightmare. And at the very time when the government opened up and people were starting to log on, the thing didn't work at all. People were sitting around waiting forever. It never actually loaded. This was problematic because all these people needed insurance. They couldn't buy it. And there was a brief period where the Obama administration thought, we're in trouble. We might have to scrap the entire thing and, say, okay, no Obamacare this year. But instead, President Obama sent in the nerds. The so-called tech surge. You know you're in trouble when your IT plan is named after a failed Iraq policy. They basically brought in all these engineers from Silicon Valley to try and salvage the website. Now, you might think of this entire boat of nerds going around the Panama Canal, right? It was actually about 5 guys from Google and Facebook. We're talking about 5 people who did in about a month what an entire federal bureaucracy couldn't do in 2 years. It was stunning. And President Obama hoped, please, right? He promised that by Thanksgiving of 2013, healthcare.gov would be fully operational. It wasn't, but it was close enough, and it worked okay enough that people were able to sign online. But
slide of Pajama Boy?
Oh, I don't have that. I have another presentation. Thank you for the interruption, Ilya. We're good friends, so that's cool.
Does it to me.
Pajama Boy. But you showing up here in any event. But the bigger crisis was not just the website, but the cancellation, which John alluded to a few moments ago. The president promised 36 times, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. We learned from Hillary Care, you have to make this promise because people won't support healthcare reform, think they're going to lose what they have. But this was disingenuous. At the same time the president was promising this, his own administration was issuing regulations making it harder to keep your plan, increasing the limits, right? Saying that if you do a tiny change, you lose your grandfather status. As a result, in the fall of 2013, roughly 4 million Americans received letters in the mail like this saying that your policy is now canceled. Yeah, if I read this, the health insurance plan you have now will no longer be available thanks to the healthcare law. Okay, good luck with that, right? So Sebelius was on Congress saying, well, we really meant if you like your plan and it doesn't change, you can keep it. Or if you like your plan or we like your plan, then you can keep it. The president's promise was dubbed the lie of the year. I didn't realize such a claim existed, but now we think it's called lie of the year. And for a politician, that's pretty hard to do, but this was a whopper. So with this, nearly 4 million people who had insurance lost it. That pads the enrollment numbers, my friend. So when people say you have to enroll for Obamacare, go down to your local Obamacare store. I don't know where this is. It's some store somewhere that sells Obamacare. I guess you can walk in and get a policy. I don't know. Buy some fries with it, whatever. People sign up. So by April of 2014, we now have 8 million people enrolled. So I want you to look at these numbers with some skepticism. First of all, about half of these people lost their policies, and they were required to buy Obamacare because they lost the policy they liked. Okay, I don't think much of that. The other thing to think about is, these people enrolled, did they actually pay? So we have a phenomenon with Obamacare, right? People sign up and they don't pay. They go to the doctor, they incur treatment, and never pay their bills. They drop their coverage. Maybe about 10% of these never actually kept the coverage throughout the entire year. So the first year people actually got insurance because they needed it, a couple million, right? Nothing to boast about. Where are we today, 2016? The government forecasted that roughly 20 million people would sign for Obamacare. 20 million. We're talking big league numbers, right? How many have actually signed up? Less than 10. So we're basically half of where we're supposed to be. And you wonder why premiums are so high, right? These insurance companies who are in trouble now, they price their premiums based on 20 million people being in the marketplace. Now they only have 10. And most people are sick or already had insurance before. This law has failed epically to bring people into the insurance marketplace. The mandate, which John Roberts absolutely loves, has been utterly ineffective. People are simply saying, all right, I'll pay the penalty, not going to buy insurance. This law is unstable. It is indeed unraveling, and it's in trouble. Let's go back and talk about something more fun, which is religious liberty. And our story of religious liberty begins with a guy named Al Smith. He was a Native American who lived in Oregon. And as part of his religious sacrament, he used peyote. This is this hallucinogenic cactus, right? Which will, I think, get you fired from Heritage if you're caught using it. This was part of the religious ceremony. Now, Mr. Smith was a drug counselor, right? Help you with addiction. You may find his employer didn't want a drug counselor using drugs, so they fired him. Smith then goes and applies for unemployment insurance from the state. They deny him coverage. They say, look, dude, you were fired for doing drugs. We're not giving you unemployment benefits. He challenges the Supreme Court, 2 blocks that way, and the Supreme Court, in decision by Justice Scalia, rules against Mr. Smith. They said, look, we as a court are not going to create special exemptions for religious liberty. If, and there's a big if the state wants to give an exemption for you, fine. But the courts won't carve out exceptions to these generally applicable laws that apply to everyone equally. Like, they're not targeting Indians, they're not targeting Baptists or Jews. It's a generally applicable law. Congress did not very much like this decision. And in record time, Congress enacted the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA. If you can imagine, the bill was sponsored by Orrin Hatch and Chuck Schumer. Can those two agree on anything today? I doubt it. But they agreed on this bill in record time. And it was enacted, I think, on a voice vote in the House. I mean, there was basically no debate. The bill, as the name suggests, tries to restore religious liberty from before this Smith case, although potentially does far more than that. It says that if the government wants to substantially burden a person's religion, they have to have a really good reason, right? A compelling governmental interest. This is really important, okay? But here comes the clincher. It must be the least restrictive means possible to achieve that interest. What does that mean? Government wants to do X. They have this way or this way. This way is more burdensome. This way is less burdensome. They cannot do it this way. They must choose the least, not the less restrictive means, the least restrictive means. That's an important factor that wasn't in the case law. Subsequent to this, the Supreme Court invalidated RFRA in part in a case called Bernie v. Flores. They said that as applied to the states, RFRA is unconstitutional. Congress cannot allow the states to be sued in this manner. Okay, fine. But RFRA still exists for the federal government. And this case begins with Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby began as a mom and pop frame store in the garage of David and Barbara Green. These are remarkable people. They started with a single store in Oklahoma City, and they were able to expand to locations across the country. I'll digress with a funny story. For my first book, I mailed copies to all 9 justices. And several of them sent me letters back saying, thanks, Josh. So I framed those letters at Hobby Lobby. So my letter from Justice Sotomayor is in a Hobby Lobby frame. I'm sure she'd love the irony. Unfortunately, I mailed copies of my second book to all the justices. I got a package back from Justice Sotomayor. She returned the book to me. She returned the book. And actually, she didn't return the book. Her secretary did. She said, I will not accept any writings on pending cases. She said this affects the Obamacare litigation. She could have benefited. I think she could have read it, learned a thing or two, but I will frame that rejection letter also at Hobby Lobby in due time. But in any event, the Green family is somewhat unique. Even though they have a company that's they have stores across the country, it's not a publicly traded corporation. This may look like an Easter card, but it's in fact a picture of the board of directors. Their entire company is owned by a trust, people of the same family, of the same religion, of the same beliefs. And as a board, they agree that 4 forms of birth control, not all, but 4 forms of birth control are sinful. Specifically, the Plan B, Ella, and what are called IUDs. If you want to know what that is, ask John afterwards. But these are forms of birth control that operate after fertilization occurs, right? You have the birth control, which comes before fertilization. More you want to learn today, right? And then these things operate after fertilization. And they deemed it sinful to have to pay for someone else's birth control. They call these abortifacients, if you want to use the term of art. Okay? The government argued, no. You're a corporation. You have no religious interest. You can't have any beliefs. And even if you have beliefs as a corporation, paying for someone else's birth control is not sinful because you're not using it yourself, right? No one's making Barbara Green take the IUD or whatever else the government claimed. The case was appealed up to the Supreme Court. And one of my favorite pastimes when discussing Supreme Court cases are the signs. There are actually entire agitation classes on how to make signs effective, and these are some very effective signs. They're getting the signs ready for January 20th, man. They're getting ready. They're going to be some the professional sign making classes. You can underwater basket weaving and protest sign making. It's a new major in colleges for the next 4 years. So this one's my favorite. It says, if men could get pregnant, birth control will be gumball flavored and be bacon flavored and be from gumball machines. And the one in the back says, my mom's not ready to be a grandma. Okay. Just really even makes sense. Because if you're holding that sign, you're ready. Anyway. This is not a church. This is a craft store. This woman is dressed up like a pack of birth control pills. Those are not M&Ms. These signs never made sense to me. No bosses in my bedroom with the silhouette of a guy in a suit like Mad Men style, right? In the bedroom. Hobby Lobby would agree with this sentiment, right? They are not interested in being in your bedroom and funding your sex life, but I think they missed the point with these signs. They're not working at the moment, so whatever. Corporations are not people, my friends. This one's my favorite. Ilya, don't say it. Does anyone know what she's holding? Ilya's seen my shtick before. Anyone guess what she's holding? What? You said it. Say it loud. It's a crocheted uterus, indeed. And there was an entire campaign to crochet uteri, and mail them to Hobby Lobby headquarters with a sign saying, you can mess with this uterus, not mine. I am fairly certain they did not buy their yarn at Hobby Lobby. I think maybe they did. Keep your hobbies off my ovaries. I'm with her. So, John, we got to work on this. The pro-lifers never has creative signs, right? They need more creative signs, right? Team Life, I am pro-life. Okay, these guys, I don't know what the heck they were thinking, but God's law comes first, repeal socialist Obamacare. They were in kilts with bagpipes in the snow. It was a very cold day that day. Okay. The case is argued by Paul Clement, who was a former U.S. Solicitor General, and Don Verrilli for the government. And the case went actually better than I expected. On the threshold question, right, can a corporation have religious exercise? Only Ginsburg and Sotomayor dissented from that. Breyer and Kagan were like, well, we don't really need to decide that, but we're not going to join their dissent, which was critical. And think about this for a moment, right? All of your houses of worship, church, temple, mosque, whatever, they're all corporations. You incorporate to take advantage of liability protection, right? The mere fact that people choose to get together and incorporate does not mean they lose their religious beliefs. Ditto for speech. If I make a corporation to fund movies, movie critical of Hillary Clinton, for example, right? That should not eliminate my speech rights. That's Citizens United. So this is not some sort of newfangled concept. People who organize in the corporate form keep their beliefs. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part of the case is whether it imposes a substantial burden on the religious exercise. So writing for a 5-4 court, Justice Alito had the majority opinion, and he explained, look, making someone buy a product they deem sinful is itself a substantial burden. And hey, guess what, government? You gave the Little Sisters of the Poor this accommodation. That means this is not the least restrictive means. It can be done better. Try again. Justice Kennedy concurred, and he had this kind of weird thing as well. We have to think of the religious beliefs, but also the right of women to get birth control. I'll repeat again. The statute was silent at birth control. Congress cannot create a compelling interest to an ambiguous term. Right? If you want it to be compelling, you specify what it is. You don't let HHS decide what becomes compelling. I digress. Then we come to our favorite dissenter, the notorious RBG. I think this was a summer that Ruth lost it. I don't say it lightly, but I think this was the exact moment where RBG went off the rails. She was having this interview with Katie Couric, and she's, oh, wow, look at me, I've on a T-shirt, right? And she developed this sort of internet persona. Now, after last week, she is the least popular person in D.C. No one is happy with her. Why? Because she didn't retire. She didn't give Obama another nomination. She could have. She could have had another justice, right? But she said, oh, I'm going to be 90 and we'll be awesome. It's going to be fantastic. I think RBG's stock is going down very quickly. Fun note, though, Justice Ginsburg has color-coded neck doilage. Right? I call these her neck doilies, little things she wears on her neck. It's like little teacup things. This is her dissenting jabot, as it's called in French. This is what she wears when she writes a big dissent. Funny note, she wore this to the court on Wednesday morning after the election, so you could tell what was on her mind. There was no opinion to be had. So she and Scalia always goes back and forth, but I don't think she's going to be too popular going forward. In any event, the pro-lifers had a victory. It's fairly rare they win cases. Let's go now to the second case, as John called it, Obamacare Part 2. His French is better than mine. This involves Obamacare exchanges. We have some of the architects of the case as well in the room right now. The Affordable Care Act, as drafted, states you can create a health care exchange where people can buy insurance, but if you don't, the federal government steps into your shoes and will build an exchange for you. Okay, this is federalism 101. States can't be forced to do stuff, but if they fail to do it, the feds can step in and run an exchange in their place. Let me fast forward a bit. But then we come to Section 36B of the Affordable Care Act, something that people have read more times than I can count. And it says, the letters are small, you get subsidies if you enroll in an exchange, here comes the big word, if you enroll in an exchange, quote, established by the state. You get subsidies on your plan if you enroll in an exchange established by the state. Now, if one were to read that, you would think it means that you get subsidies if you enroll in an exchange established by the state. I mean, that seems fairly straightforward. But apparently the Obama administration never either read it or didn't care enough until a benefits lawyer, a guy named Tom Christina in South Carolina, read the law. He actually read the actual law, the entire thing, cover to cover. Really smart guy, right? And he said, wait a minute, this is some funny language there. This means that if, Texas, where I live, doesn't build an exchange, that people in Texas won't get subsidies. Okay, Obamacare without subsidies is unaffordable. And guess what, guys? If insurance is unaffordable, you're exempt from the individual mandate. And guess what? If no one gets these subsidies, the employer mandate goes away. This insight, and Tom Miller and other, people at AEI and Cato and Heritage, people look at it like, oh my God, this is a silver bullet. Like, this can maybe not kill Obamacare, but severely wound it. So lawsuits were filed across the country challenging this rule. The federal government said, well, we're going to interpret Section 36B. And we're going to pretend the word state means federal, right? So whether you sign up in a state exchange or a federal exchange, it makes no difference, right? Healthcare.gov, whatever else. And this paragraph was basically the only paragraph that tries to explain it. They say, well, we look at the entire bill, the structure as a whole. Everyone gets subsidies. Okay. So this was challenged in court by the Competitive Enterprise Institute and also Michael Carver at the Jones Day law firm. And the litigation actually went fairly well. A circuit split formed. The D.C. Circuit, a couple blocks that way, ruled for the challenge. They said, look, this language is pretty damn clear. And even though this might screw up Obamacare, that's only because they've implemented it with subsidies in all these exchanges. People got accustomed to these subsidies. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled for the U.S. government, and that creates a split. It went up to the Supreme Court. Don't take my care. And once again, John Roberts would break my heart. It's June. It's going to be a heartbreak from the chief. So Mike Carvin argued it against Don Verrilli. And then we get to the decision in June of 2015. The Chief Justice said that the plain text argument is strong, right? That the phrase established by the state means established by the state. So that's strong. However, when you read the bill as a whole, as an integrated system, this won't work if states cannot have subsidies without building an exchange. It can't work. So the chief ruled for the government. He said, the purpose of the ACA is to improve health insurance and not destroy it. And we will read the ACA to ensure that health care is not destroyed. My friends, this is sophistry. And I can't repeat this enough, but the bill was a draft. This was never meant to be the final version of the bill. The House version of the bill had no state exchanges. Had none. They didn't trust the states to build them. Had this gone to the conference process, that would have probably prevailed. So this entire thing about the state exchanges, this was a relic of the fact that Ted Kennedy died. There is no single purpose of Obamacare. Even if we take the bill as it is, one of the purposes was to encourage federalism, to encourage states to participate. It's not insane to think that Congress would have withheld money from states that don't play ball. They do this all the time with environmental laws and otherwise. Justice Scalia dissented, and he delivered what would be his last dissent from the bench. I didn't know at the time, but it was his last dissent from the bench. And he said, the Supreme Court has changed the rules. All the normal rules of statutory interpretation have gone out the window. For the single purpose, the Affordable Care Act must be saved. Indeed, Justice Scalia called it not Obamacare, but SCOTUS care. This is a law that's been rewritten twice by the Supreme Court and would not exist without the pen of John Roberts. It's perverse that perhaps the only person who can stop John Roberts is Donald Trump, even though Ilya thinks that we have Donald Trump because of John Roberts. So with that, the subsidies were upheld. Which brings us to our final case, which I'll wrap up with, which involves the nuns. Yes, the Little Sisters of the Poor. These are amazing people. They're an order of nuns that have nursing homes throughout the country. And they take in the elderly and the sick without regard to religion, without regard to anything else. If you're suffering and you're poor, they will take you in and care for you. These are amazing people. After the arguments in their case, I actually went to a lunch about a block from here with the Little Sisters. You know, this room full of nuns. I felt like I was in a casting call for The Sound of Music. It was pretty cool to be there because usually at the Supreme Court, everyone's very uptight, dressed in their suits. But you had all these nuns sitting there in their habits, right? And you have the guys in the robes, right? The full-on robes walking around the court. It was a surreal day, and I think all the Catholic schools gave the kids a day off, so they were there in the plaza protesting and demonstrating and chanting, singing, "God bless America." No one was kneeling. It was very impressive. The case was again argued by Paul Clement as well as Noel Francisco and Don Verrilli for the government. And I was there. Actually, Ilya swore me into the SCOTUS bar that morning, so it was a pretty big day for me as well. I was sitting 5 feet from Paul Clement that morning. And the argument seemed pretty divided. Because at heart, the question is this, right? The nun said, if you make us sign this piece of paper, you are making us complicit in sin. You are making us amend our insurance contract to provide these forms of birth control that we deem sinful. The nun said, can't you just do this some other way? Give these people a separate insurance card. Like you have a dental card, you have a prescription drug card. Give you a separate card. Go on Obamacare, buy a birth control plan, right? Or pay $5 for a pack of pills. Whatever it is, right? Don't make us be involved in this process. The government said, no. You need to use the same insurance plan, otherwise it's not seamless. That imposes a burden on women for them to have a separate card. That imposes a burden for them to enroll in a separate plan online. That is too burdensome. And the justices seemed somewhat conflicted about this. So after the case was argued, the nuns came down the steps. They did not get into a bus, but they did go fairly close by, and they didn't quite know what was going to happen. What happened next is crazy. The court gave some extra homework. They ordered a supplemental briefing. They said, well, is there any other way you can resolve this problem? Right? Is there some other way that you can resolve this without us having to do anything with 8 justices? They didn't say that last part. But is there any other way that you can resolve this problem? The parties followed the briefs, and Paul Clement's brief said, well, no, not really, right? Maybe we can tweak how they notify the insurance company, but at heart, we want a separate insurance plan to cover birth control. And the government said, yeah, maybe we can tweak notifications, but we want the same insurance plan to cover birth control. Had the Supreme Court resolved this conflict, they pretended it didn't exist. They issued this bizarre 8-page opinion saying, well, the parties came to us and they said that you can work something out. Go work it out, you guys, right? They remanded it to 8 different courts of appeals with no instruction whatsoever how to resolve this conflict. And that's where the case stands to this day. I'll have none of it, as the nuns say. But there's a future, right? Which brings me to my last slide. I don't know what happens in January of 2017. I don't think anyone, maybe this upstairs knows, but at least no one in this room knows what's happening in about 60 days. And I'll try and keep my remarks as Obamacare-centric as possible. In the short term, a lot of this litigation goes away. The Little Sisters of the Poor case, with a single rulemaking, the Trump administration, I still can't believe it, the Trump administration can simply exempt the Little Sisters. Done, right? Piece of cake. With respect to the House Representatives Burwell case, the government's making all these payments are illegal. Stop the payments. With respect to the individual mandate, hey, guess what? Barack Obama suspended the individual mandate, so can Trump now. Obama suspended the employer mandate, so can Trump. All these executive actions that President Obama took to delay, postpone, suspend mandates, Trump can do the same thing. And I will be so happy to say, you now care about the separation of powers? How convenient. I mean, go on these liberal blogs, and the pictures now of James Madison, right? It's surreal how in the last week liberals have discovered federalism anew. It boggles my mind. But will this law be undone? And that will be the title of my third book. Look, I discussed there's a reconciliation path. There's even the possibility of the Republicans getting rid of the filibuster period for legislation. I would not support that, but it's still possible. But I think at bottom, you're going to need some form of legislation that gets some Democratic votes, which is not as insane as it sounds, because Democrats are hurting a lot of people up for election because their people can't afford insurance. So you may be able to get some sort of reform that buys, 8 or 9 Democrats, or Joe Manchin, whatever, to get over the 60-vote hump. And if you actually get some sort of bipartisan healthcare reform, you are in such a strong position. Don't make the same mistake as Obama, make the straight party line vote. It was an arrogant decision on his part because it did not endure. You need enduring change for this to work, and I think maybe we can make healthcare great again. Thank you all so much, and I welcome your questions.
Yeah, I think, first of all, Josh, that was incredibly impressive. I mean, I was sort of reminded of those theaters that you go to where you see a performance of Hamlet in 23 minutes. It was really, it was great.
Yeah,
and I'd never
arrows are persecuting me at this moment still.
and I'd never seen that lie of the year thing too. I was reminded of a quote that I once heard, which is, "The key to success in politics is sincerity. Once you learn to fake that, the rest is easy." pretty good. We've got a few minutes for questions. I have my own, but I think we'll go right to the audience. Let's start right here. We have first of all, no speeches. Keep it short. Say who you are and any affiliation. Come right, it's behind you, and then ask a question.
Sorry, a little bit complicated, but 2 parts. Heritage Foundation has indicated, belief of equal rights for all and special privileges for none. So I'm asking, why do you consider it'd be a special right to oppose contraception in Obamacare and government, but that's the right, but that you don't grant the right to pacifist taxpayers not to support the military, or pro-sanctuary taxpayers not to support steel and concrete along the border? That's number one. And number 2 is, if conservatives complain about accommodating the life that has already been born, as indicated by their opposition to immigration and welfare programs, why does there continue to be opposition to family planning and birth control, even if such programs cost a fraction of the steel and concrete they want to put along the border, and even if such programs are effective in reducing the number of welfare dependents and poor immigrants in the first place?
So you can take that microphone back.
Thank you.
I am not your speaker today. I will not answer that question. We'll go right here.
Yes, sir. My name is Kami Bhatt. I'm with the Pakistan Spectator, and my question is that a lot of Democrats complain that Republicans just make noise and they don't give any tangible plan that could cover, some people, people can be proud of being American because they have Heritage Foundation. And I'm a Muslim. I don't believe in health insurance. I believe in Allah. But I was a student here for 6 or 7 years. Then I had insurance. And then after that, I had insurance now, because when I was filing my tax, it was suggesting me that
Can you get to your question, please?
I have to buy insurance. So I bought insurance.
Can you please get to your question?
Sir, my question is this. I bought insurance because of Obamacare. See, problem is you don't like to be criticized. And I'm doing very positive criticism. He was doing very positive
Yes,
criticism.
but you're not the speaker
today. But you don't
today.
have tolerance. I'm
Okay.
sorry, he understood my question. Thanks.
So So your question is, what do you do because you bought Obamacare?
The individual mandate for a lot of people is worthwhile. For some people, simply paying the penalty is a better deal than actually buying insurance that's not very useful for them.
Go ahead. We'll get one more. Actually, we may have a couple, but go ahead.
There was a bill, I think, sponsored by Senator Wyden of Oregon and Senator Bennett of Utah several years ago, which had bipartisan support. Could that be the basis, using that as a model, as a basis for a bipartisan agreement now?
I vaguely remember the bill, but I don't remember the specifics. I think the short of it is a lot of Democrats in vulnerable states are going to need to support something because it's becoming unaffordable for their members. And if they didn't do nothing, in 2018 they may be even more vulnerable.
Okay. We'll come down here for a question.
Thank you, Mark Venezia, Center for Individual Rights. Just a clarification. The form that the government put up as required for the Little Sisters of the Poor. There's that form. That was an opt-out form. So they were offered the ability to opt out, and they want the alternative, which is you have to opt in. Is that?
No, it's actually not an opt-out, and let me show you the microphone. If you read the back of the form, I don't have the slide handy, it actually says we will use it as an instrument in your policy. It's actually amending their insurance contract. It wasn't really an opt-out form.
But they could sign it, and then they would...
But they sign it, their insurance contract's amended, and that's the basis of their objection.
They didn't want to sign anything where once they signed it, it set them on a path to the abortifacients being provided.
It's a plan instrument under ERISA, if you want to get into the technicalities.
Okay, we'll take a last question right here.
A lot of the attention with Trump coming in has focused on the thing, where he said, well, we don't want to take away the pre-existing condition coverage, but then how do we do that if we take away the mandate? I mean, so, yeah, how do you balance that argument of that kind of populist rhetoric versus what might work?
Right. So by far the most popular aspect of Obamacare is the so-called pre-existing condition ban. It's also the most expensive aspect of Obamacare because what happens is people cannot now be charged more for having significantly higher health costs. The first point is the individual mandate has not been effective. People have simply chosen to pay the penalty rather than buying insurance that's not useful. So people aren't entering the market; it's too expensive. Another proposal that I've seen floated around says that the subsidy should not be based on your income, right? It should be based on how sick you are. And that if you're sicker, the government simply just directly subsidize that. That way policies can be priced based on market conditions and not the anomalous person who comes up the street with, some sort of rare pancreatic cancer, whatever requires a lot of care. There are a lot of proposals, and maybe to address the previous question, Speaker Ryan has a thing called the Better Way. It's this 35-page plan that, isn't legislation, but gives some high-level bullet points. And I think now that both houses are controlled by Republicans, we'll see some specifics in the next 3 or 4 months.
Josh will be available to sign copies of his book. Please join me in thanking him.
Thank you so much, John. That's good.
That was a very impressive presentation.